You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Tom Spender, and today we're talking about Iran's new president, Hassan Rouhani, and what we can expect from the Islamic Republic under his stewardship. Rouhani convincingly won June's presidential election and has since sought to strike a conciliatory tone, promising to end what he called the 8-year dark era under the previous president Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and arguing that the dispute with the West over the Iranian nuclear program can be resolved. Iranians hope he will be able to persuade the US to lift crippling sanctions on the country, where the value of the currency has tumbled and inflation is running at 40%. Some also hope he will boost freedom of expression and release political prisoners. However, other observers are sceptical that Rouhani is a reformer, bringing up his long career within the Iranian government's diplomatic and security apparatus, and pointing out that the real power in Iran lies with the supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who approved Rouhani to stand for election. So, will Rouhani really steer Iran along a new path, and does he even want to? Joining me in the studio to discuss this are Saeed Kemali Dehghan, a journalist with The Guardian newspaper, and Peyvand Khorsandi, an Iranian writer. And on the line from Tehran, we have Dr. Mohammad Marandi, an associate professor at the University of Tehran, and in London, Nazenin Ansari, diplomatic editor of the UK-based newspaper Kayhan London. I want to start by asking the question, who is Hassan Rouhani? What is his story? Saeed Kemali Dehghan, perhaps I could start with you.
Rouhani is a moderate cleric. As you mentioned, is the ultimate insider. He's always been working with the Iranian government and Islamic Republic since they started in 1979. He supported Ayatollah Khomeini when he was in Paris, and later he had different positions in the government and also in the regime, like he was in the parliament as an MP. He later was promoted to different postings, especially during the Iran-Iraq war. He held a strategic position. And later he was promoted to become Iran's nuclear negotiator under reformist Khatami. He was the head of Iran's National Security Council, and then if you are the head of the National Security Council at the time, you are the de facto head of the negotiating team. And now he's the president because he promised to bring moderation back to Iran after 8 acrimonious years under Ahmadinejad. And he's seen as somebody who's pro-reform and moderate. And we are seeing now in his cabinet that he has people who are relatively moderate. And you can see reformists, you can see even principalists. But in general, you see moderate figures in his cabinet.
Peyvand Khorsandi, is there anything you'd like to add to that portrait of Iran's new president?
Yeah, I mean, what you said kind of says it all. He's someone who thinks that Iran's been through some dark times for the past 8 years. That's why I wouldn't take the man seriously. I think he's a thuggish gangster, and that if you think that Iran's been in dark times just for the past 8 years, you are simply immoral or amoral. So that's my position on him.
Okay. Mohammad Marandi, in Iran, who do Iranians in Iran think he is, and how does that differ from the kind of gentle reformist image that he appears to have gained in Western circles?
I think in general, President Rouhani is viewed as someone who is both moderate and someone who is a consensus builder. One of his criticisms of President Ahmadinejad is that Mr. Ahmadinejad often pursued policies that, in the opinion of Dr. Rouhani, were not founded based upon a consensus of bureaucrats and experts, and that many of his policies were pursued for political reasons. But I think that Mr. Rouhani presents himself as someone who surrounds himself with experts and who wants to pursue policy, both economic policy and foreign policy, based upon the voice and opinions of experts. Now, whether everyone agrees that that's true or not, or whether he surrounds himself with the right sort of experts, different people have different opinions. But I think the fact that he had a very high vote and that the turnout was very high shows that he has a lot of public support, and that and that since his political opponents during the presidential elections subsequently backed him, I think he has a lot of backing to pursue whatever policies he wishes to pursue in the coming months.
Nazenin Ansari, does he have your backing?
Well, may I first start by just talking about the elections? I wouldn't call them elections. They were selections. They were basically the choice that was given to the Iranian people was, number one, didn't include any women, and number two, it was a competition between people that were accepted by the Islamic Republic. Also, as far as Mr. Rouhani is concerned, yes, he has received a PhD from Scottish university, but unfortunately it has been in Islamic law. It's as if I would go to Qom and get a PhD in market capitalism or social liberty or women's studies. He was elected promising moderation, promising wisdom, but unfortunately his appointee to for the Ministry of Justice has been Mr. Pur Mohammadi, who was served as interior minister during Mr. Ahmadinejad's first term, and he has been intelligence minister, and he has been implicated in many human rights abuses, especially those in the 1998, which was the execution of thousands of political dissidents in 1988, and the assassination of several prominent dissident intellectuals in 1998.
And he egged on the security forces in 1999 when they cracked down on students and killed them. And this is the thing, is that one of the things these guys are experts in is death. And one of the things we mustn't forget is that in 2009, there were people getting shot in the street, there were brains spilled, there was skull fragments cracked by bullets. They were driving cars into people. This is the government, this is the fabric. He belongs to the fabric of such a government. He has never spoken out against it. So when we speak of the reform, we're talking about making the Islamic Republic more legitimate and preserving it. The hijab will stay in place, torture will stay in place, the lack of freedom of speech will stay in place, and the use of blood to maintain power, the spilling of blood will take place. And one thing that I take objection to is how the blood that is literally the lifeblood of the Islamic Republic, which is people's blood, the blood of students, thinkers, writers, is forgotten in these debates about reform and becomes sanitized by these concerns of the West, such as just nuclear, just Israel. You know, people have died for these guys to be in power, and they will continue to die.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Tom Spender, and today we're talking about Iran's new president, Hassan Rouhani, with my guests, Saeed Kemali Dehghan, a journalist with The Guardian, Peyvand Khorsandi, an Iranian writer, Dr. Mohammad Marandi, an associate professor at the University of Tehran, and Nazenin Ansari, diplomatic editor of the UK-based Kayhan London. Let's ask you, Dr. Marandi, what's the feeling in Tehran? Will there be any significant policy changes, and what will they be, if there are any?
Well, I must say I disagree, obviously, with what your two previous speakers were saying. When your guest was talking about blood, I thought maybe for a moment he was talking about drone attacks and the invasion of Iraq and the murder
the blood of students
Iraq
demonstrating and killed by the Iranian government.
So I think, and the support of the death of I don't know how many thousands of people in Egypt just over the last few days, as we saw, the turnout in the Iranian election was 73%. And therefore, I think that itself shows that the elections were not selections and that it was meaningful for ordinary Iranians. Iranians are not foolish or not ignorant.
But they don't have choice. They were just getting rid of Ahmadinejad. You know that.
I didn't interrupt you, so if I could...
Well, I'm interrupting you, but you know that they were just getting rid of Ahmadinejad.
If we could let Dr. Marandi finish.
Mr. Ahmadinejad, who I didn't vote for, was elected fair and square. He got his 2 terms, and now someone else has been elected.
I mean, that is an outrageous claim. And people died for Ahmadinejad to stay in power.
I respectfully disagree.
Well, you're washing the blood off the hands of the Islamic Republic. That's what you're doing.
Well, in any case, that's...
Tell that to the father of mother of Neda Agha Sultan.
If I'm allowed to speak, I'll speak. If not, you can have someone else as a guest. I could just...
Dr. Marandi, please do continue.
I'm not allowed to talk.
In Iran, you're allowed to talk. People like me
Okay. Peyvand Khorsandi, let's let Dr. Marandi finish his point.
Yes, I think, at a time when we had very open debate over the elections, we don't have such debates in any of our neighboring countries, which are now falling apart one by one, partially thanks to American policy. And I would also like to add a small footnote about the hard drives that have been destroyed in the basement of The Guardian, which is a reflection of the growing freedom in Great Britain. But in any case, the ultimate point here is that President Rouhani has high support.
Okay, Saeed Kemali Dehghan. So we have Rouhani. He was voted in. He is building consensus. He's putting together a cabinet. It does include people from a wide range of backgrounds. It also includes, for example, some people who have been criticized for having a Western education, as I understand it. His foreign minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, has a strong experience in the US, for example, and has quite good contacts there. And his choice for oil minister, Bijan Zangane, was a campaign advisor, apparently, to Mir Hossein Mousavi, who didn't end up winning the 2009 election. So what does that tell us? He's building consensus, but what will the effect of that be?
I think I'm not as pessimistic as Peyvand or Nazenin mentioned, and I'm not as optimistic as Mr. Marandi, but I think there are some popular support for Rouhani. Just look at the letter that was sent out from the Evin prison recently. For example, the 55 prisoners wrote to President Obama, asked him to lift the crippling sanctions that I mentioned. And they described Rouhani as somebody they trusted. I think it's the politics in Iran has always been. It's difficult to see it as black and white. It's always been very complicated, and it's difficult to just say, he's somebody who's supported a bloodshed, or he's a very liberal.
Well,
he's not.
He has supported bloodshed.
I think
he actually said crack down hard, words to those effect, when they were shooting, attacking students in 1990. I mean, do you deny that he said that?
I don't deny. I said that he tries.
In which case, he supported that.
He wants to come across as a moderate figure. Look at his, for example, parliamentary speech last week when he was referring to the 2009 protest. He said there was at some point there were people in the streets. At some point there were people who were suppressing them in prison. In Kahrizak camp, where people were killed in that prison camp by the regime. So there is no question about that. But in reality, I think Rouhani has some support, not even from the general public, but also people who are in jail for criticizing the same government.
So why didn't Nazenin Ansari, the prominent activist, sign the letter? Why didn't Bahman Qobadi sign that letter that you're talking about?
Obviously there are people who don't have faith in him.
It's actually not true that he has that much support.
But Peyvand Khorsandi, there's clearly a plurality of views in Iran. As we've already heard, it's a big country. Some people voted for him, some people didn't. But he is now the president. Most people agree that it was a legitimate election within the confines of the Iranian electoral process.
Sure.
And the question now is really, what's he going to do?
You can't have plurality of views without freedom of press. And the fact of the matter is that as my father, who's a satirist, once said, in Iran there is freedom of speech, but there's no freedom after speech. And it still remains the case that there is no free press, there is no freedom of speech. The Islamic Republic is successfully whitewashing its blood just as it's washed it from the pavements, it's washed it from the vocabulary and memory of Saeed, who a journalist who should know better than to say that this guy has had no hand in crackdowns and has not supported violence. He has vocally supported violence.
I didn't say that he was not involved in crackdown. I just said that despite he's at the same time he's expressed criticism of the crackdown. And it's difficult to say that he was
support within the prisons where people are getting tortured, where key opposition prisoners have not signed the letter that you referred to.
There is no denial that there are human rights abuses in Iran that I have reported in a very extensive length about the human rights abuses in Iran, including a National Institute that just you mentioned. I've reported, I think, about National Institute more than anybody reported in England.
I get my information from your report.
All right, okay. I want to move on a little bit here. Nazenin Ansari, we can see that Rouhani cuts a moderate figure, but he's also a controversial one in the sense that there isn't full agreement about what he represents. But what do you think he's going to do? What policies do you think he's going to put into place? What's his biggest challenge?
Number one, he should free political prisoners in Iran. He should support a moratorium on executions, specifically on child executions. He should remove media restrictions. And unfortunately, I don't see in his cabinet a name of any woman except a vice president on legal affairs, one woman. From all of these people, there's only one. From over 20 people, he has only appointed one as vice president, and that is not enough. Academic freedoms. Why should students who have been participating in dissident movements or in opposition, in demonstrations, not be allowed to continue their educations? Why should a member of the Baha'i faith not be able to have access to education? Basically, civil societies. Let's see an empowerment and an encouragement of activities of civil societies. And certainly, under former President Khatami, we saw that. And we saw how civil societies aimed to bring about change in their daily lives, in the daily lives of Iranians.
Mohammad Marandi, if I could come to you very quickly. As I understand it, sanctions are possibly the biggest single issue affecting ordinary Iranians in Iran. Is that right, or are they looking for freedoms, more kind of social, liberal atmosphere that, as we've been hearing from Nazenin Ansari?
Well, again, I have to disagree with some of what's been said before. First of all, in Iran, the idea that there is no freedom of speech. If anyone looks at websites active in Iran right now and the amount of attacks that different political factions in the country carry out upon each other, against the current president, against the foreign president, against one another.
Against the supreme leader?
It's pretty extensive. It's not something one can hide and to pretend that this is somehow, it's non-existent.
But Dr. Marandi,
yes.
I mean, okay, but surely, as I'm reading in the media here, sanctions imposed by the United States on Iran over its nuclear program are having a significant and serious impact on the lives of ordinary Iranians. And part of what prompted them to vote for Rouhani was the hope that it would end a kind of atmosphere of friction with Western countries and therefore lead to an easing of sanctions. And what I'm really asking is... Go on.
Yes, well, again, I think that the point here that I'm trying to make is that first of all, instead of one or two of your guests caricaturing Iran, the true violation of human rights actually is being carried out by the United States and its allies against ordinary Iranian people. The sanctions, you're absolutely correct, they are hurting ordinary Iranians. Ordinary Iranians have died because of a lack of medicine, because many medicines have become very expensive. Since the United States has tried to shut down the Iranian central bank, it's almost impossible now to easily import and export goods without them being much more expensive and much more difficult to obtain. So, yes, the Iranians have suffered as a result of these sanctions, which are illegal and are directed at ordinary Iranians. If you look at WikiLeaks documents, they say so themselves in the West explicitly. People in Iran are hopeful that President Rouhani will be able to find a way to break the sanctions regime. But you have to keep in mind that Dr. Rouhani himself has pointed out on numerous occasions that Iran is not going to give up its right to enrich uranium or to have a peaceful nuclear program, and it will continue with its peaceful nuclear program because, as he has stressed, Iran has always worked within the framework of the NPT and the regulations of the IAEA. So, and if you look at polls carried out regularly over the years by Western polling agencies, the overwhelming majority of Iranians believe that the nuclear program is an issue of national sovereignty. So he will be hopefully able to find more creative ways to find solutions with the major powers to resolve the issue. But if the United States expects Iran to capitulate and to give up its sovereign rights, then I think a solution will be difficult to find, because that's simply not going to happen. The Iranians will not capitulate.
Saeed, go on.
Yes, one final point that I'd like to make is that over the coming months, non-Western countries will also be looking at what the United States and its allies do, because till now, former President Ahmadinejad has been used as an excuse, as a bogeyman, saying Iran is a threat to the world. But now there's a new president, and if the United States does not behave reasonably towards Iran, that will only encourage non-Western countries like Russia, like China, like India and Brazil and others to reformulate policies towards Iran, move closer to Iran, and that will isolate the United States and its allies.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Tom Spender, and today we're talking about Iran's new president, Hassan Rouhani, and what we can expect from the Islamic Republic under his stewardship. Saeed Kemali Dehghan, is Iran in a stronger position than we think then? Will it be able to build alliances with other world powers in a multipolar world, or will it ultimately continue to suffer really quite badly under American sanctions?
Well, Rouhani is in an exceptional situation where he has some support in Western governments. You know, when in the inauguration ceremony you saw, for example, after 8 years, that you saw David Cameron writing letter to Rouhani, you saw French president writing letter to him. So obviously he has some credibility because of his past records. When he was the former nuclear negotiator, under him, Iran for the first time agreed to halt enrichment of uranium. Iran allowed more scrutiny into its nuclear program. Obviously now Iranians are not going to halt enrichment at all because they perceive it as a right to do so, and it's not on the table at all. Iran has the right to enrich uranium, but the question is whether Iran would allow more transparency, as Rouhani said, into activities. There are legitimate concerns by the international community about Iran's nuclear activities, and the question is whether Rouhani would be able to form a negotiating team would convince the international community about those concerns. For example, today there was report whether that Iran's nuclear dossier is going to be transparent from the National Security Council to Iran's foreign ministry, which I see as an optimistic point. And then, if that happens, we will have Zarif, as you mentioned, the veteran diplomat, be in charge of Iran's nuclear dossier.
Peyvand Khorsandi, what do you make of Rouhani's potential foreign policy direction?
Well, I mean, they definitely will and are outwitting the West, and will succeed in outwitting the West and getting their objectives. And from the Iranian perspective, so long as Israel's got an undeclared, unacknowledged nuclear arsenal, there's no reason to be truthful. And really, if you sort Israel out, and then you've got a chip to play with. But at the moment, with Israel's monumental arsenal that is illegal under international law and is unacknowledged, well, from an Iranian perspective, why be truthful? Israel's not truthful. So, and this double standards, of course, only it is just simply unhelpful.
Nazenin Ansari, what is concretely, rather than calling for what you would like Rouhani to do, what do you think he is actually going to do?
Well, number one, as you mentioned, the economic situation in Iran is very dire indeed. And he would, as a first instance, would try to improve the economic situation, not by infrastructural developments or changes, but rather hoping to, in the first instance, try to convince the Europeans and to lift the SWIFT banking restrictions. In so doing, I think he will be able to get some breathing space. Certainly, as Saeed mentioned, the nuclear file will be going into the foreign ministry. Now, that is, in other words, that's a technical and a tactical change. We will see probably more technical and tactical changes in rhetoric. But at the end of the day, who will be making the decision whether to be more transparent, whether for the military aspect of the Iranian nuclear program to become more transparent, or to for there to be a moratorium on uranium enrichment, on that, I am not sure. I am at this moment. I would like to be more realistic, and I think it doesn't look good in the medium to long run. But certainly in the next few months, we will see Mr. Rouhani having one-on-one meetings, or certainly there would be more track 3, that is, meetings along in international academic institutions, conferences. But in the grand view of things, will there be any change? Unfortunately, I still remain pessimistic, but I hope I am proven wrong.
And finally, Dr. Mohammad Marandi, where do you think we will be in a year's time, a year from now? What will we see or have seen from President Rouhani?
Well, a couple of things. I think that we will see Iran to continue behaving like a sovereign country that it is, and the Iranians will continue with its nuclear program as it's peaceful. Mr. Al-Baradei, the former head of the IAEA, has said that they're when he was the head of the organization, that almost all the issues had been resolved. But I think the more important thing is that while we see Iran as a very stable and strong and independent country in the Persian Gulf region and in West Asia and North Africa, we see other countries falling apart, growing more unstable. And Saudi Arabia, which has a very old and perhaps dying king, is itself moving towards greater instability. So it's in the interest of the United States and its Western allies to rethink their policies towards Iran, to behave more rationally towards the country. And instead of backing extremists in Syria or Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia, they could find a much better partner in Iran.
All right. Well, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for. It's been a fascinating discussion. Joining me in the studio were Saeed Kemali Dehghan, a journalist with the Guardian newspaper, and Peyvand Khorsandi, an Iranian writer. And on the line from Tehran, we had Dr. Mohammad Marandi, an associate professor at the University of Tehran, and Nazenin Ansari, diplomatic editor of the London-based newspaper Kayhan London. Thank you all very much.